We've reached the end of chapter 4, and chapter 4 is one of the easier chapters. Really, it's a two-flavor chapter. A lot of Mongols, a lot of bubonic plague. Most of you got it. Easy to learn. It's interesting, but just in case you've missed some class or you missed today's review, these are the terms I need you to know before we move forward. No surprise, we're going to start with Genghis Khan. I'm not going to get into his biography. I'm guessing you know this, but the man who unified the Mongols to go on to conquer 9 million square miles, and you know the story how Genghis Khan is a title, king of kings, that sort of thing. So I'm going to guess you already know about Genghis Khan. Now, a little more involved is why he was successful. And bear in mind, on your AP test, you need to make an argument. So let me make an argument. Why was Genghis Khan so successful? Well, you can make an argument he was highly organized and that he put people in positions based on their skill and merit, not birth and nepotism. I would argue good things. Also, they had strategies and innovations that other people couldn't defend. The speed of their horses, the speed of their bows and arrows, the viciousness, how they arranged things. So organization, speed, innovation, that was the root of their success. Now, another reason I feel they were successful, when they spread out, they let people worship as they wanted. Now, I think what's a cool thing in modern times living in America, we can worship however we want or not worship at all. That's a wonderful thing. And I think they were ahead of the times. And they realized, if you're going to have religious conflict, that's not good for the bottom line. And if you look at the world of today, if you look at the Mongol Empire like a wave and it hits this big old wave and then it recedes, a lot of the religions that were there during Mongol times are still there geographically. So you could make the argument the reason the makeups of the religions are such as they are in Afro-Eurasia was because of the Mongols. Okay, so I know it's fairly early in the year. When we get closer to May, we can fatten up that argument. Okay, oops. Sorry about that. Okay, now that was a little surprise, like got big on me. So the Yuan dynasty. Now the Yuan dynasty was actually Mongol run, even though this is China. You can see on this picture it is China. The Mongols ruled China for a long time. Now I think what stands out with the Yuan dynasty was Kublai Khan, the leader there, and his interactions with Marco Polo, and this cultural diffusion between West and East, this cultural diffusion between the Mongols and China. It resulted in some kind of cool outcomes in this respect. Obviously, the book that Marco Polo, reinvigorating this connection between East and West that's been lying dormant since the Silk Road in a lot of respects, that sort of thing. And I mentioned Kublai Khan, great leader, grandson of Genghis Khan, and he was a very interesting guy. He was interested in all sorts of subjects and invited people to learn from them, and he taught them. So again, the Yuan dynasty, even though it's a Chinese dynasty, it's actually Mongol. Okay. Now, here's a concept I think it's easy to get as a high school student. When there's something really large, we tend to piece it into manageable sections. Here's two obvious ones for you. Big high school. We have grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12. Amongst the teachers, we have a math department, a science department, a social studies department, and an English department. We divide things up. So the Mongols had 4 parts. Now, the Ilkhanate the furthest one away from the Mongol home base in Mongolia, and they had a pretty rough time of it. As a matter of fact, here's a story I think personifies this. A Persian Persian killed a Mongol scout or a messenger, and it infuriated Genghis Khan so much he ordered the killing of 1 million people. And if you look at the sacking of Baghdad, which was the hub of this part of the world, 13 days of violence. Okay, this is a clear display of hegemony, telling the Middle Eastern world, the Mongols are saying, hey, we are running this show. And again, they did it in a Mongol way through a lot of violence. Okay. So I'm going to keep this picture just for the sake of time, and you can see the 4 parts. So here's the Ilkhanate, which is the southwest Middle Eastern, the Golden Horde, not to be confused with Golden Corral, that's a buffet. Golden Horde was the northwest part, which included Kiev. And then we had the Chagatai, which actually, it wasn't a whole lot of difference between the way those people were living for the Mongols, easiest to assimilate, and then the Great Khanate, which eventually had a portion of that be the Yuan dynasty. So again, this is huge. Let's keep it real simple. This is really, really big. And if you have something that's really, really big, you kind of have to section it off to organize things. We do it in high school, and the Mongols did the thing. However, they didn't govern as well as they conquered, and it didn't last very long. The Mongol Empire did not last very long. And there's that third portion. Okay. Now, one thing the Mongols did bring eventually was they planted the seeds to what became the bubonic plague in 1347, that interaction. There's actually still some debate, was it, marmosets, Eurasian marmosets or rats? But we do know this interaction and these hemispheric interactions were actually at the foundations of what became the bubonic plague. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but a few years before the bubonic plague, about 30 years before, there was the famine of 1315 and 1317, and it was really difficult to live there. We had a lot of people dying, people who were very malnourished, people who barely squeaked by. So you have this whole generation of people with really low immune systems and people who are sick. And, obviously, if you have a weak immune system, you're probably going to get sicker more than somebody with a good immune system. So there's kind of a precursor. The Mongols were a precursor to the bubonic plague. The famine of 1315 to 17 was a precursor, which brings us to the actual plague, the most destructive pandemic in human history. I know you've all survived the COVID-19 pandemic. It was rough. It was terrible. It was international. This was far, far worse, 6 years. And let's keep it real simple. Here's a bacteria that gets into a flea. Flea gets upon rat. Rat gets into your house. Bacteria in the belly of the flea jumps off the rat, bites a person, and that is it. And it was rough. It was really rough. Now, people tried to stop the plague. You see these in Halloween where the doctors would stuff this beak with, flowers or onions, something strong. They tried leeching and bloodletting. The flagellanti, they're a lot of fun. They felt if they beat themselves up, that will stop the plague. Pogroms against the Jews. In fact, these circles, kikels, there's actually a really horrible derogatory term you use for a Jewish person that you say, it comes from this word kikel, which is circle, which was this golden circle that was drawn on this, and these hats they were forced to wear. So people didn't know. They didn't have the science. Because they didn't have the science and they were doing ridiculous means of stopping it, it just went unabated. And it was rough. It killed a third of the people, and that's conservative. We don't know exactly what, this is 1347, but we guesstimate it's about a third of those exposed to the plague died of the plague. And in class, we talked about all the cultural things that surrounded how the art was death themed, the song was death themed. We read some of those primary sources and whatnot. It was a mess. Okay. And by the way, if you can take a parallel from COVID-19, it messed things up, but it didn't. I mean, this was completely messed up. Just big fundamental functions of society. Boom. Really was a failure. Okay, now this is the real AP part. This might be the most important slide for our future on the test. So what were the effects of the plague? I can see this being a question in May on your AP test. Now, political, obviously, if you lose a third of the people, governments were not equipped. Okay, if you had a committee and a third of them are gone, or they're too scared to show up because they're sick. So politically, it was quite difficult. Now, religious, a lot of people lost faith in the church. Now, bear in mind, the church, especially in Europe, was the main force in people's lives. A lot of people said, "The heck with this." They lost a lot of faith in this. Now, in terms of social, family structures broke down. A lot of people just abandoned their family. Anti-Semitism increased. A lot of people blamed the plague on Jewish people. So socially, it was pretty bad. Now, in terms of art, you know this adage that art reflects culture, culture reflects art. That's always been, it always will. So the motif was death. So it affected the art world. Really, it was kind of a one themed art world at this point. Now, economic, this is an unusual one because you're seeing negative, negative, negative. Now, think about this. If a third of the people are dead, so here, I'll give you an example. There are 6 social studies teachers on staff. If 2 of them died, and I show up the next year and they say, well, we need social studies teachers, or we need somebody to teach the classes of my dead colleagues. I'll say, I'll do it, but you better pay me. And they probably would. So what happened was, you can take that to bakers or any, job. Hey, I'm the only one in town. I'm the only baker in town. You're going to buy my bread? Yeah, shoot, I need bread. So economically, believe it or not, it was actually kind of a positive for those who survived. Now, in terms of governmental, feudalism lost a lot of power because the peasants couldn't be controlled. The feudal pyramid that was predicated on labor and control, if you're fearing for your life, you really don't care anymore. Okay, that kind of dissolves. You just kind of every man for himself. Now, in terms of the future, now this is the biggie. Here, I'm going to end with the big point. Those who did survive were equipped with a stronger immune system. A fast forward in time about 150 years, where Europeans and Africans start going all over the world. Those people had an immune system quite different than the indigenous people that they interacted with. And you can guess what happened to the indigenous people when they were meeting up with people with a very different immune system. But we'll touch upon that later. So this chapter, hope you found it pretty doable. That's just a breakdown of what I hope you learned, and I appreciate you watching.